welcome to tonight's Corona Conversations event. Before I introduce our panel, I just wanted to say a couple of things to you. The chat function is very much there for you to use. Please do post links to relevant websites and information. Please do comment, but also ask questions, and we'll do our best to put those questions to the panel as we go through this evening. We will moderate the channel, the chat function, so if we have anyone abusing that chat function, any inappropriate behaviour or abuse in that chat function, we will kick you out, I'm afraid. So zero tolerance of that. And we have had that happen once before, and we were very quick and hot on it. Please don't do that. Let's make sure we have a good conversation and we use the chat function well. The approach to dealing with coronavirus has very much been at the national level, and we felt it was really long overdue that we took a regional lens to this issue, because it seems pretty obvious to me, and I'm sure to many of you, that we can't beat this virus and we can't recover economically until and unless we really think about how we bring the different regions and local authorities with us to ensure that women, wherever they are all over the country, are both better protected and also able to participate in that economic recovery. And I just want to share a couple of data, a couple of statistics with you, which actually are from our previous devolution work, just to give you a bit of context for where we start this conversation. So pre-COVID, pre-coronavirus. So for example, in Greater Manchester, we know there are 73,000 missing women from the Greater Manchester labour market, or at least there were a couple of years ago when we did that research, and with a pay gap of about £9,400, so earning £9,400 a year less on average than men. Ethnic minority women, the employment rate was 47%, whereas for white women it was 73%, so huge difference in participation of Black, Asian and minority ethnic women. In the West Midlands, the employment gap actually was even greater, it was 108,000. And actually that employment gap grew over a period of time, so it gone from 10% to 12%. And in terms of social care, we looked at what difference would it make if we invested in social care, obviously a huge issue right now, if we actually got decent paying conditions for our social care sector. And there it was worth £4.4 billion to the West Midlands economy. So it would actually help to grow the economy in the West Midlands if we invested in social care. 83% of that social care workforce are women, and 23% are on zero-hours contracts. That's in the West Midlands region. So that's all pre-COVID. That's before we got to this crisis. Now, obviously, we've seen what's happened in Leicester, the local lockdown, and we know that that's probably the first of a number of those local lockdowns. So what happens in the regions is going to be more important as we go forward. And we know that it's been a controversial relationship, shall we say, between central government and local government and regional governments in terms of both data sharing, consultation and general kind of partnership working. So that's one of the issues we definitely want to explore this evening. But more importantly, how we build back better and whether we can really fundamentally depends on how well we work with our regions. So we're really pleased to be having this conversation this evening. So I just want to move to introduce our panel now. I'll say a few words about each of them, and we'll try and keep it quite chatty and quite lively and give you a chance to contribute as we go through the event. So first person I'm going to introduce is Asma Day, who's a journalist with the Huffington Post, an award-winning journalist, I should say, who's based in Preston, Lancashire, and her work brings a perspective and views from outside the London bubble. And Asma specialises in investigations, original stories with a human interest focus, and wants to ensure people from all diversities of life have the chance to make their voices heard and to highlight inequalities and injustices they may be facing. So welcome, Asma.
Hi, everyone.
Deborah Cadman OBE, who's Chief Executive of the West Midlands Combined Authority, and Deborah's been really supportive and involved in Fawcett's work over the last few years. She became Chief Executive of the Combined Authority in September 2017, following over 30 years in public service. Previous senior roles include Head of Policy at Redcar and Cleveland Borough Council, and Local Government Advisor to the Ministerial Team at the Department of Environment, Transport and the Regions. So welcome, Deborah.
Thank you very much.
Now I'll introduce Pam, who is Pam Smith, Chief Executive of Stockport Council. She's also Greater Manchester's lead Chief Executive for Age Friendly Greater Manchester and is a key driver of the Greater Manchester Women and Girls Equality Panel, which is a new initiative that I'm sure she'll tell us a bit more about, and that Fawcett is really delighted to see Greater Manchester launching on, because we've been calling for it. The panel's aim is to accelerate gender equality across Greater Manchester's 10 boroughs to enable women and girls to live their best lives through equal opportunities to start well, live well and age well. So great to have you with us, Pam.
Thank you.
Introduce Chris, who's our token man for this evening. Sorry, Chris. Who's the Associate Director of Savanta Comres, and he's done some very important work because he's the man with the numbers, and we're going to hear a bit more about those new data in a moment. He works closely with media, think tanks, trade unions, campaign organisations and political parties on a wide range of communication and policy-focused research topics, often conducting research amongst hard-to-reach and vulnerable groups. So good to have you with us, Chris.
Thank you, Son.
And last but not least, is Namaira, who's a singer, songwriter and composer. She comes from Birmingham. She's an international recording artist, a performer and songwriter speaking truth to power with a fearless lyrical approach to subjects that mean a lot to her. Deeply passionate about raising the profile of Black, Asian and minority ethnic women and girls across the West Midlands, as she hopes to build a change movement through Namaira Change Formation, her music and story, to be a part of systemic change for all people in a meaningful way. So Namaira, really delighted to have you with us as well this evening. So I'm going to go straight into questions from me first of all, but then I will look to the chat function and make sure we bring you in. First, I want to come to you, Deborah, first, actually, to just think about decision making and what your take is on decision making in this lockdown period and the involvement or lack of involvement in the regions. How has it been for you in the West Midlands?
I think the overriding emotion, I think, for a while was frustration, and that was primarily because of the lack of subsidiarity around decision making. So, at the beginning of the crisis, everything was centralised in central government. So if you recall the shielding arrangements that were put in place, it was all managed by from the centre and central government. So they lost the opportunity to do it right first time, and then we had to retrofit a process that just wasn't appropriate. So, how would they know that there were people that they were delivering food to who couldn't eat the food because they were vegetarian or because of cultural requirements? Women weren't engaged fully, I don't think, who were shielding about the particular support they needed. We all saw the rise in domestic violence, yet if it had been placed and rooted at a local level, not necessarily in local government, but with local community groups and in communities themselves, I think we would have been able to have responded much quicker and much more appropriately. So it was a bit of frustration, really, initially. And then in terms of broader decision making, I have to say local government rose to the challenge and were absolutely magnificent and just demonstrated that, when the chips are down, local government is where it needs to be, which is working very closely with its communities and delivering the services and providing the support it needs to provide. So mixed emotions, really, but we've been quite feisty as a region with central government around decision making, and where we found blocks, we just said, you know what, we're just going to do it ourselves because we're going to do the right thing in the right way.
And that's really positive to hear. And I think we've heard that coming through from other local authorities as well, in terms of the fact that they've seized the initiative and taken, really sort of risen to the challenge themselves. Yeah. But it's frustrating, as you say, when you're not getting that kind of engagement from national government. Yeah. Pam, can I bring you in on this from a sort of Greater Manchester perspective, and for you to tell us how your experience has been through this crisis in terms of your engagement with central government, and also maybe anything you've been able to do working across the regions or working with others?
Yeah, I think we've definitely, as a city region, come together on things like PPE, because there was clearly a shortage and problems with the distribution of PPE. So we've worked collectively on that. We had a lead in Greater Manchester for that, to support particularly our care home sector. We, in Greater Manchester, some of us continued with the testing when it was stepped down, so we took a local decision around that. And we've stepped in, as Deborah said, we've had to be there as, unfortunately, the backup team sometimes. We didn't want to be the backup backup team of it, delivering, but we've had to more up some of the things that haven't worked as well as they could have done. We acknowledge that, you know, the government's never been in this position before. None of us have ever been in this position before, and it was going to be messy. But I think it would have been more helpful if things could have been devolved quicker and sooner to local government, which has got those community connections, and we could have made more of them. And I think the challenge for us now is to galvanise that community spirit, which has been built upon across the regions and across different communities, so that we can continue supporting people, because this is an ongoing situation. It's not something that, you know, it's not dealing with your normal emergency. You know, I dealt with the Todd Brook water incident. We knew there was water in a reservoir. We knew it was going to come or not. This is not like that. This is an ongoing situation. So I think in Greater Manchester we've acknowledged that, and we're trying to now put in place the continuing humanitarian support and the decision-making processes in place, so that we can learn from what's happened and make sure our communities continue to be resilient.
And that's really important, isn't it, in terms of how we go forward, because as you say, we're not at the end of this by any stretch as yet. Can I just ask you to say a little bit more about the panel and that we're setting up in Greater Manchester? That feels like a really positive development, and what's the time frame for that, and do you think it will have any kind of bearing on how you respond to COVID?
Yeah, the time frame for that is we're out to advert at the moment for panellists. We want to make sure that there is a rich diversity of panellists. That's really, really important. You know, the survey that's been undertaken is from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, different community backgrounds. It's really important that we get that women's voice in there in the next couple of months, and that we really listen to women and what their issues are, and we integrate it into the decision-making structures. And I think that's really important. We've got 10 districts in Greater Manchester, and it's important that we have representation, not only from the different sections, but the different geographies, because they play out quite differently across Greater Manchester. And it's really important to us that that voice is rooted in the decision-making processes, and that it informs policy, and that we make sure that women feel they have a voice. And it's easy, because women have busy lives, and we make sure that we use the technology, the digital technology, to make it easier to interact. So for me, it's about making sure that that voice is integrated into policy. It's, as I've said, we're out to advert. It'll happen in the next few months. The Mayor will be really keen to hear the voice of women. I know he's really keen, as are the other leaders. And I think it's incredibly important that we, to use a phrase, we crack on with it. And we are really specific about the actions and the targets that we're going to put in place, so that we're not just listening to women, we're actually taking actions on the things that matter. And then when we look back in 12 months' time, we have a measure of what we've done, and how we've managed to integrate that voice into those decision-making processes.
Yeah, that's really important. And Deborah, you've run a citizens panel in the West Midlands. So tell us a bit more about that, and how has that worked and involved women? You're on mute.
Thank you. Right, am I muted?
No, you're not.
Right,
now.
great. I'm unmuted by the host. And I'm really pleased to see we've got Claire Spencer on as part of the audience here. So Claire, I don't know whether you can speak, but you might want to contribute. So we decided that in order to have appropriate recovery or plans for recovery, we needed to ask the community two things. One, how have they experienced COVID? What's been their experience? And secondly, what do we need to do as a public sector and a private sector, actually, to ensure that there is resilient recovery that meets the needs of a whole range of communities across the region? And it's been absolutely phenomenal. It's been a really, really good thing for us to do. We are now in the process of pulling together the priorities for recovery, and work through how we can ensure that the citizen's voice continues to inform and help us along this journey, which as Pam said, isn't going to be a quick journey. It's going to be a marathon. I suspect we'll see more outbreaks in the future. So we need to be, really thoughtful and resilient about the way in which we respond to those. At the same time, also addressing some of the disadvantages that some of our residents are experiencing. So the under 25s, women, those representing BAME communities. So we're being really targeted and thoughtful about that. But it's been absolutely the right thing to do, and it's been brilliant, really, really good. And I'm really happy to share the outcome of that with the group, so we can put it on. We can allow it to be accessed by people if they're particularly interested in it.
That's brilliant. We'd love to link to that actually and promote
Yeah,
that.
absolutely right. And women's voice
Really
was very loud on that panel as well, and quite rightly so.
Excellent. That's what we want to hear. Asma and Namaira, can I come to you both now? Asma, firstly, just tell us a bit more about what you're picking up through your work in terms of women's experiences in, well, perhaps in your region and the region you live, but also the regions you report on.
I think the important thing that the coronavirus crisis has really brought to the fore is that women are disproportionately affected in so many ways all the time. And I think the pandemic's really just sort of shone a light on some of the issues that people are grappling with all the time anyway. But I think it's really given an opportunity to ask questions, look for solutions, highlight inequalities and injustices, and the way we at HuffPost like to do things is we want to give people a voice so they can tell their stories in their own words. So there's no need to sensationalize, it's just people's real stories. And that's what we really felt it's important to give people, everyone from, single mums, those trapped in domestic abuse situations, those battling poverty, people worrying about how they're going to feed their children, people from Black, Asian and ethnic minority backgrounds, and how they've been impacted disproportionately by the virus in so many ways. There's been a larger number of deaths, but also the fact that they are maybe put in situations through the work and the jobs they do. So that's really something that women in particular may find, that they're in forward-facing roles on the front line. So I think the important thing is to realise that it has actually it is important to highlight that this is the way women and people from different minorities have been impacted by the virus, but also the fact that some of the situations they face aren't just during the pandemic, but there all the time. So there needs to be a more long-term solution, which isn't just a short-term fix during this crisis.
Yeah, that's a really important point as well, because we're really shining a light on systemic inequality that was there already through this crisis, and that's what's been very transparent from the beginning. Namaira, can I come to you just in terms of your experience in both personal and the sort of campaigning work that you're doing using your profile and your role? What are you finding in your region?
Yeah, I mean, similarly to what Asma just said about the fact that we're highlighting issues that have already been there before, I found that I'm coming from an arts background, so music and theatre background in terms of my practice, and found that even before the pandemic had hit, there was a lack of resources, funding, a lack of systemic support, like regionally with arts organisations that are actually able to support women in an intersectional way. So it's not just in either giving them funding, it's about giving them funding and then giving them the business development to actually make something happen and progress with that. So I think the pandemic's highlighted for me that the people who wasn't already getting support have been double affected or triple affected by the lack of support and systems that were there in the first place. I think just as a response to that from funders that have stepped up to support musicians in vulnerable positions, I think it's been quite impressive, and I've been quite happy with how funders and PRS and Help for Music Managers Forum, how institutions that musicians have to use daily have stepped up to support. So I'm seeing response to it in a way that actually helps us and goes direct, and it's not actually that hard or that difficult to access. So yeah, hopefully that continues as we move forward and build back. And
have you seen any sign of this arts funding in your region? Have you had any news on how that's going to feed through? The government's arts funding in particular, I'm talking about their 1.5 billion they announced.
No, I'm quite interested to see how it's going to be disseminated. I had reservations about it at first because I felt like it would be problematic to give that amount of money, whether it's spread across main organisations or leading organisations in the arts, if they already are not able to support women based on the representation in their team, or their outreach teams or learning participation departments are not already engaging with those women, or with people from ethnic minority backgrounds. Giving them the money doesn't seem to help. I think after reading the research as well, it kind of backs up my initial thoughts of thinking that it's about co-creating spaces in the community with people, and actually in the process of building up mental health centres or pop-up centres, it's about women in those community actually receiving the business development to keep that going and keep momentum going in the communities. Should this ever happen again, or we have second waves, we're able to then, you know, respond to it very well.
Yeah, one of the things we've been calling for, amongst other things, is a proper equality impact assessment of how that money is going to be spent, for example, because our concern is it won't find its way to the right people, and again it will just kind of get fed into those who have already, you know, got more resource and advantage in the systems. That's something that, you know, an equality impact assessment could prevent. Chris, I'm going to come to you now to share the research slides with us so we can see a little bit more about the data before we carry on with the conversation, and also bring in the audience a bit more. I think Chris is going to share his screen with us now, so let's see if this technology works. Here we are. There's a few slides, so I'm going to hand over to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So yeah, I'll run through the data sort of very quickly, but I think one thing that was quite striking to us as researchers was that the data seemed to be fairly similar across both regions, which I think was interesting. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a one-size-fits-all approach in the response, and I think what was striking within the data as well is that although the responses of all women were very similar across both regions, there were some really key and striking sort of demographic differences. But you can see just on this slide, which is the West Midlands, and things don't change very much when we move to Greater Manchester, especially when we're talking about health. So I'll just run through a few sort of key takeaways, particularly regarding health, because this was something that stood out quite a lot. So the message really from women in both regions was pretty clear. They see the provision of health services at a local level is really important, and many would use them if they were available. We found 3/4 of women, at least in both regions, I think it hit 4 in 5 in Greater Manchester, say that it's important for local or combined authorities to provide mental health services and other health-related services such as physical health assessments and provision of green spaces were also placed on a bit of a pedestal above some other sort of traditional council services that might be available. Exercise and advice and support weren't quite as important compared to sort of mental health provision and physical health assessments, but that might just be down to the mass availability of those services. And contrary to what I've already said, what was really interesting about this was that there were hardly any demographic differences. Women, whether of different ethnicities, of different ages, different employment statuses and home situations and financial backgrounds as well, all viewed mental health and physical health more importantly than they would sort of employment and things like that. There also seemed to be a bit of an implication that if these services were made available as a sort of local pop-up in a hub, they would be used. So I think half of women in both regions said that they would use physical health assessment centres if they were locally available. Similarly, similar numbers with mental health. So although half of women are saying that they perhaps would not, half were, and those that were most likely to use them, they tend to be younger women, women from BAME communities, and also parents, but also potentially sort of those from higher household incomes and higher socioeconomic groups. And I think what we found generally throughout this research is that it was actually women from higher household incomes and higher socioeconomic groups that did tend to say that they had that COVID had impacted them slightly more, but they might have been from a considerably more elevated position and therefore had slightly further to fall perhaps than those are from a lower socioeconomic group. And we also seem to think that desire for these services may stem from the way that sort of COVID pandemic has affected everyday life. So more than a third of women in the West Midlands and a few more, I think, in Greater Manchester, said that their diet and their mental health had considerably worsened during the lockdown. And equally, women were at sort of 1.5 times more likely to say that their physical health had got worse rather than better. The difference was particularly stark among women, again, from a lower household income. There were also some striking findings in the sense that women were almost twice as likely to say that their self-confidence had gotten worse rather than better. And we think that this really pointed to quite a deterioration of not only mental health, but just general well-being during the last sort of 4 months. Despite this, women have been walking more during lockdown, but I think that that's probably not surprising considering the government's rules regarding transport and things like that. And although the women did tend to tell us that they had more time to do various things, including exercise during lockdown, I think, as Pam already said, women are busy, and I think this is just going down to the general rules that were put in, and women may have had more time to do things, but again, those that were more likely to say that they had more time had tended to have been furloughed or maybe made redundant, or maybe working reduced hours. So I think that it kind of makes sense in terms of what they were saying. I've touched on that briefly already, but we'll hit on employment. Again, there wasn't huge sort of regional differences between the two regions, but in terms of the importance of employment services and what local authorities should provide, they were kind of in a second tier, just below general health provision. So it was clear that women did want or do think it's important for local and regional authorities to provide some employment help. I think the most striking findings within employment were really how jobs have changed for women in the last sort of 4 months during the pandemic. So we can see here, again, this is just in the West Midlands, but it was very similar to Manchester. That a fair few have seen hours change, have seen location change, or have been furloughed. I think about 1 in 5 had been furloughed. I think across both regional authorities as well, out of those 4 particular changes, we'd seen 1 in 10 have sort of more than one thing affect them. So whether that was changing location or changing hours or changing pay as well, sort of taking a pay cut during this pandemic. About 1 in 10 women have had 2 of those things happen, and that can be quite stressful for anyone, particularly, but even worse, during a pandemic when there's so much uncertainty. And we did also just find that just only 1 in 5 had experienced absolutely no change in their role. Those that had been furloughed disproportionately were categorised in the lower social grades. So a third of DEs had been furloughed compared to 1 in 7 ABs, and I think that really does hit that kind of socio-economic divide that furlough may have caused. Again, specifically looking at hours, 2/3 of those working women whose hours had changed are now working reduced hours. And that equates to about 1 in 6 working women overall across both regions. We also found sort of economically that changes in job security had quite a knock-on effect on the ability to cover living expenses. Roughly sort of 2 in 5 women said that they were comfortably covering their living expenses before the pandemic hit, but that dropped by a 1/5 when we're asking if they can cover their living expenses at the moment. More than a quarter are now saying that they're struggling compared to 1 in 6 pre-lockdown. And we found that there didn't seem to be much optimism going forward. I think when we had, in the way that we asked the question, although fewer women said that they might be struggling in 1, 3 or 6 months time, that tended to be women converting to not knowing where they'll be in 1 to 6 months time, rather than saying that they'll actually be more comfortable in that period. Having said all this, I think what we found striking, again, when asking some employment questions, was that there was quite a desire to retrain and reskill, and that comes back to some things that have already been said. If some of these services can be provided, particularly maybe as a local pop-up, women are keen to go to these and to take advantage of them. Again, they did tend to be BAME women, parents, and younger women. But I think there was also sort of seemed to be a bit of a desire for some skills retraining, and we also looked at which sectors women might want to upskill retraining, and while health and social care was at the top, that might just be down to the gravitas that we're holding our health and social care workers in at the moment. But overall, at least a third of women said that they had thought about doing some kind of retraining during this period. So I think that was quite telling, that if women may have more time to do various things now, but they've given a thought about their career, about upskilling, about retraining, and about progressing, particularly in the workplace. And then one final one that I'll just touch on, we didn't ask too many questions about digital skills, but one thing that we did find really telling was that women there seemed to be a bit of a discrepancy in their perception of their sort of digital capability. So we found that generally 4 in 5 women said that they had satisfactory internet to browse the internet. 3/4 roughly said that they had satisfactory internet at home to stream films and television, but only half said that they had satisfactory internet to work from home. And as we've seen in some previous questions, way more women are now working from home, and that may be something that continues apace in the near future, particularly as we enter, I guess, the least enjoyed phrase at the moment, the new normal. So if there is this perceptions gap, then perhaps women will be less likely to take jobs that requires home working, even though it could, obviously really increase sort of flexibility and potentially a work-life balance. So, while we think that there, could be some infrastructure issues, I think that discrepancy was quite telling. And like I say, while around a quarter of working women are now working from home as a result of the pandemic, it may be something that sooner of a necessity rather than a luxury, that home working and upskilling digitally is really important in these local economies to facilitate an easier home working setup and lifestyle.
Thanks very much, Chris. It's really interesting data there. And I think we'll be making this data available after the event as well for those who want to see the data set. There's one question actually just come in the chat function about sample size. And I think it was 1,000 women in each region, a representative sample. Is that right?
Correct, yeah. Yeah,
lovely. So there's loads of questions coming in now. So I'm going to come back to the panel just to reflect on that data and just ask the first question that's come in, which, how are we going to make sure we're using this data to inform policy and how we spend money and going forward? So is this data useful, and can we use it in a way at combined authority level, which is actually going to inform what we do going forward? That's from Jane Kemp, actually, at West Midlands Women's Voice. So Deborah, perhaps I'll put that one to you first. Just, is there anything that sort of leaps out at you when you sort of listen to some of those numbers?
All of it is important, and what I want to assure the audience that this will inform our recovery plans. So it's quite fortuitous that I'm chair of the Regional Recovery Coordination Group. So we have the opportunity to dictate not just what we do in terms of recovery, but how we do it as well. So using data, using the systems panel, engaging with our young combined authority, supporting and engaging with West Midlands Women's Voice to do events like this, and to commission them to do additional engagement and research is really, really important. So I want to reassure people that this is something that we will use as a basis to inform our work going forward, certainly our recovery plans. At a specific level, the statistic that makes my heart bleed is that statistic that says that women's confidence has been reduced through COVID, and that's the most serious issue for me. In addition to all the income levels and etc. But the fact that women feel less than they are because of their experience of COVID is something that we have to be really thoughtful about, and I think is really particularly troubling. We are being quite specific about retraining and reskilling. We're targeting women in particular, but we're also doing lots of work around providing apprenticeships and employment support for young women coming out. We've got some really good statistics about what we've done and what we're intending to do going forward, specifically for those women that may well find themselves unemployed post-COVID. And we know that when furlough lifts, we can expect to see the numbers of unemployed increase significantly. And I know, Sam, you were going to ask me a question about the impact of so many of our retail organisations shutting up shop, and what's the impact of that on the regional economy. And it will be significant. It will be significant about the vitality and vibrancy of our town centres and our high streets in particular. But you know that the majority of those that work in retail are often women, and young women at that. So we've been really thoughtful about the impact of the reduction in retail jobs and what that means, and how we can compensate that through retraining in other growth sectors that we're seeing from the region.
Yeah, and I think that's, again, really, really important, isn't it, to understand the sort of gendered impact of that, because so many of those employees, as you say, will be women, they'll be young women, they'll be low paid women, and they're the first to go. And that's in that through the data as well that Chris has shown as well. There's lots of questions coming in now, so I'm just going to put another question to you, Pam. So thinking about services in the region, and there's a question here about domestic abuse services in particular. Is there anything that you're doing in Greater Manchester to support domestic abuse services? Are you seeing an increase? I suspect you probably are, significant increase in demand for those services, calls to the police and so on. How are you responding to that?
Yeah, we have seen an increase in, as everybody across country has, an increase in domestic abuse cases. And what we've done is we've tried to use what we've already got. So, for example, some of our housing providers have kept vacancies so that women have got somewhere to go very, very quickly. We wouldn't have normally have done that. But so that's an example of some of the things that we're doing. Also looking to what are the different models providing domestic abuse. I don't know if anybody's heard of Auntie's House, where this is about women offering other women rooms in their home temporarily. But we're looking at all those things. But that's what we've done. We've tried to work with our housing providers to make sure that women have got a place to go, but also having programmes for perpetrators as well, because this is as much an issue to stop the domestic violence as it is to give safety and a safe haven for when women really need it. So we're trying to tackle the issue from both sides, and I think it's important to do the preventative stuff as well as provide those safe havens. But the fact that we have seen domestic abuse go up at such a level, and I think that coupled with women's confidence levels dropping, as Deborah said, I think is a real concern, because we want to build back better and set women up for success. And that means that we are going to have more targeted and tailored programs. As Chris said, this isn't one size fits all, and I think that's going to be a challenge for us, given the financial challenges that we face, to make sure that we have enough programs at scale, but that we also tailor programs to meet women's specific needs.
Yeah, again, that's really important, isn't it? So responding to specific groups of women through all of this. A few questions on the chat function are being raised about self-employed women, so basically being a forgotten group, and they as businesses and as workers, they're very much kind of not being catered for through the government response. And I wondered, Namaira, from your point of view in the arts sector, for example, where many employees, the vast majority I would have thought are probably self-employed on those sorts of very loose contracts, at least. What have you seen in your sector? I think you might be.
Yeah, I mean, can you hear me now? Yeah, I think the initial cancellation, there was 2 weeks where everything just went from booked to cancelled, and that probably echoes the confidence thing, because it's about momentum, especially in a freelance capacity. You're working on projects, or you're working to build a brand or a profile. So that kind of slowing down would give any person who's been working hard on their ambitions a bit of a confidence knock. I think in the same way that things kind of fell, I think the music industry responded quickly, and we had Blackout Tuesday quite soon after it. So, and obviously that was related to the Black Lives Matter movement and supporting that conversation. So I think because of that, there was I'm going to say the word wrong, camaraderie, togetherness. There was a sense of like community globally for the music industry. So I think for me, I felt that the response was quick in terms of people being on it and people being responsive, and that kind of replaced some of the lack of confidence or feeling isolated or alone for me personally. Yeah, and again, just on that, the thread of organisations or institutions that I lean on to support. There's more local organisations as well, not just big institutions like PRS, like Punch Records is a great platform at the moment for me. They're supporting me with my business ventures, giving me actual direct support. So I know that there are people and tastemakers and organisations that are key in doing that. I think it's about closing the gaps down to make it easier for women who perhaps weren't already in that before to get that, and reintroducing themselves to the community and having a wider reach. Yeah.
Thanks very much. And Asma, I just want to ask you about a point that Yasmin Zazala's made on here, where she says, what about racism, sexism, discrimination and harassment? And I just wondered whether you, in your coverage of this issue, picked up any stories that particularly highlighted that. We certainly see it nationally, for example, with increases in pregnancy discrimination and women feeling they can't challenge being discriminated against because they're scared of losing their jobs. So, you know, equal pay cases, for example, are falling through the floor because they can't challenge pay discrimination. So have you picked anything up like that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it has brought the whole issue of discrimination and racism to the fore. I mean, from things like the high numbers of people from Black, Asian and ethnic minority backgrounds who've lost their lives to COVID. You know, there's been things like, you know, people working in the NHS saying that they're too afraid to speak out because of the way the institutions and organisations are, that they're too worried to raise their fears. So if they feel they don't want to be in a frontline role, they're too scared to sort of voice, can I move somewhere else, because they think it might impact their jobs. There's also the fact that there hasn't really been too many answers from government on why there have been, you know, this section of communities being affected. I think there's been a real call for transparency. Really, I think that's something that's come to the fore. With the Leicester lockdown, I did a piece where I spoke to lots of people in the community, including women, who talked about how the fact that there has been an extra lockdown in Leicester, they suddenly found themselves becoming the target of racists. So there's a real culture of blame when you actually dig down and look into some of the reasons why. Again, the explanations didn't come out as fully as they should have done. You know, I think locally the authority said that they felt that they should have been warned in advance that, you know, the rate was going higher. But it's brought a lot of issues such as poverty, such as slave labour, you know, all sorts of issues, inequality to the fore, when actually it's so much easier for people to just blame certain communities and, you know, finger point and bring out sort of racist connotations. So I think that there are lots of things that this crisis have highlighted, which need to be tackled, and answers that need to be given, and inquiries that need to be held. And I think there are lots of people, and including women, who have been disproportionately impacted. And I think until we get thorough answers, we're not going to be able to make sure these people don't carry on suffering, and that it doesn't happen again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that. We've absolutely got to get some answers to all of this when we do have that inquiry. Chris, we're getting quite a few questions about the data, so I just wanted to come to you just to give us a bit more information. So some people are saying, did you get comparative data for men? One question I wanted to ask you was where you found that women said they had a bit more time in their hands. Was that also true of mothers and those caring, for example, which I suspect may not have been the case, but just have you got anything more you can tell us about the data?
Yeah, so there is no comparator to men, unfortunately. I think it would be useful to do it as a control, but it wasn't something that we were commissioned to do, so we didn't do it. I think there was one question generally about confidence, and if there was a comparator to men on that. I think, you know, there's been lots and lots of research over the years about the differences between men and women's confidence. So my strong hunch would be, if we ask the same question to men, they would not say that their self-confidence has deteriorated during the pandemic in the same way that women have. Don't have that data to back that up, but I'm going to put myself out on a little bit of a limb there. I think in terms of the time question, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think, you know, obviously we did ask it to parents. We didn't necessarily ask anyone if anyone had any caring responsibilities. But my guess would be that I think women would have tended to have said that they did have more time net to do some of the activities that we listed. But I think that may well just be down to the overall impression that I think the government wants to drive forward during the pandemic, that, you know, if we're not working, if we are not going out, if we're not socializing, then yes, we've got more time to do various things just naturally. I don't think that question necessarily captures the home pressures that people will be under. But in terms of net hours in the day, then yes, possibly you may. You know, I think women did tend overall to say that they did have more time to do various things.
Okay, thanks very much, Phil. I mean, another interesting question, which I'm going to raise because it's been an issue we've been banging on about recently, which is childcare. So Lisa says, any thoughts on childcare services? Lack of that provision is what seems like a demise in providers. And I know that there was, again, pre-COVID, there was an issue about sufficient childcare places in both Greater Manchester and the West Midlands. So Deborah, I just wonder from your perspective, what you're seeing in terms of childcare provision at all in the region, or is that something that's a concern to you going forward? Because it's one of those enabling sectors. We want to get the economy going again, and actually getting childcare going again, and protecting what little bit of childcare sector we've got seems quite important.
So am I muted?
Yeah. You're all right.
Am I back there? It is a real concern for us, and you're absolutely right, Sam. It is one of those enabling sectors that we need to be up and running to allow women to return to work. But it's not just childcare; it's education as well. So a lot of women who are working from home are also self-schooling their kids, etc. And a lot of women are making a judgment call about not returning to work, actually, because it's too difficult, because they don't have the right provision. So part of our skills work that we're looking at is skilling up more women to do childcare, but also to support those SMEs, those small businesses, to ensure that they stay in business. A lot of our childcare providers have furloughed their staff. Some of their staff are deciding not to come back. And we're also ensuring that they're getting the support they need, because, you know, to comply with the health and safety guidelines, et cetera, is just too onerous for some of our smaller providers. So we're working through our business hubs, through our chambers of commerce, to ensure that we can provide support and guidance to those small businesses to keep them running. But it is a real concern, and I don't think it's just a concern for the West Midlands. I think it's a national concern as well. And you've heard me talk about the importance of early years and appropriate childcare. You know, it is shocking that so many of our children in this region are not school ready. There's a third of our children that are not school ready by the age of 4. And that means, you know, they can't speak properly. They're still being presented in nappies, etc., etc. And that disadvantage stays with them throughout all of their education career. So when we pick them up at 17 and 18, you know, we've got a double, you know, it's doubly difficult to ensure that they have the right opportunities and they have access to work, etc., etc. So we're really concerned about the provision of childcare, because it kind of feeds, you know, lots more disadvantage and exclusion than we need to see across this region. But we are absolutely focused on trying to remediate them.
And we've been lobbying the Chancellor to spend some of his billions on the childcare sector, and as yet not been successful, but it's really good to see that you're doing that, at least in a regional level. Pam, can I you, just for the same question really in terms of childcare, but also I want to put another one to you which links to it, which is from Harriet Atkins, who says, how can we look after the physical and mental health of new mums in our region when it's difficult to see anyone face to face for non-emergency issues, e.g. physio, and with restrictions on close contact, e.g. baby groups, you know, so the old Sure Start centres, if you like, how important they are to provide huge social support. I worry about the long-term effects of the cutbacks in these areas. So what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, and just to pick up on what Deborah said, we've had in Greater Manchester a real focus on early years because it is absolutely critical, and we've been supporting our childcare sectors. And I'm really pleased to hear you, Sam, say about putting pressure on the Chancellor around childcare, because I think that's really important, because some view the Chancellor's statements so far as not addressing those issues around childcare and the things that women need to get back into the workplace, and actually for me not recognising women as an economic engine, and I think the lack of it's totally unspoken about the things that we need around childcare to support women back into the workplace. So just wanted to echo what you said on the specific around you know, new mums and you know, what can we do to support new mums. I think that it has been incredibly difficult for new mums, particularly because some of those community health services have been pulled into other things quite naturally because of COVID and hospitals being short of staff and the need to service the NHS generally. So I think some of those things have been missing, and we do need to stand them up. You know, I personally know how important those things are and that they're very local. So when you're a new mum, you need that local interaction, you need that face-to-face, because it can be, you know, it can be very isolating. So I think we have to stand those services up, and we have to make sure that we do that. But also we have to, I think, facilitate things like this for new mums. It doesn't all have to be, it can be virtually face-to-face. And I think sort of facilitating some more of that sharing would probably be helpful, but I agree with the person who asked the question that trying to stand those services up, and while COVID continues, finding different ways of bringing new mums together, but also bringing them together with the healthcare professionals that they need to interact with.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right, finding new ways to do it, because it's going to be a while yet before we can really return to anything like previous normality. I'm just going to give you a couple more comments from the audience and then come back to the panel. Karen Peters says there's a lot of activities and interventions which have been eliminated out of women's lives that will affect confidence. Feeling unable to homeschool adequately, not caring for older family members, no gym and socialising, all things women place a high value on. So that the things that are feeding that kind of knocking confidence, those mental health issues. And then Christina says, many key workers, females who are also single mums, suffer terribly for lack of childcare and homeschooling. And this is probably not well planned from the beginning. Absolutely. I mean, it's a plight of single parents completely invisible from the government strategy, which is why we called our campaign Make Women Visible, because they certainly weren't as far as the government were concerned, including at decision-making levels. Asma, I'm going to come back to you now to think. I want us to focus the rest of the conversation though on how we build back better and what the positives might be. So give you all a chance to think about how we can go forward out of this, and what your what your priorities might be, but the things you would like to see both at regional level and national level actually might take us forward. So what do you think would be a really welcome step that perhaps could be done at regional level, and then from Boris himself?
Do you want me to?
That was to Asma Day. Actually, it was Asma I was asking that.
Oh, okay.
Hiya. Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I feel has been highlighted is that those who were struggling already or facing inequalities, the gaps have been widened. And I do think that a lot of the reactions to the crisis and has happened after people have already suffered, and so it's all been very sort of, a lot of the decisions to help people has been very late. So they've already, you know, people have been struggling to feed their kids, or people have been worried about how they're going to feed kids over summer holidays. things. It's all been, you know, people are self-employed, have been worrying about how everything's happened after people have been suffering. So I think one of the important things is to learn lessons for the future, so people don't have to go through unnecessary suffering again before action is taken. But the other thing I think is really important is to build back better, is to listen to the voices of everyone from all diversities. And one of the most important ways this can happen is to actually have people, at the moment, you know, unfortunately, a lot of organisation, they are still very male heavy at the top, male heavy, white heavy. And I think what we need is people from all diversities, and not just in the bottom tiers of organisations, but all the way through to the top, but not just as a token gesture. They need to be there for the right reasons, and they need to be listened to, and all voices need to be heard, and they need to represent the communities that they're serving and portray what's needed.
And all the evidence shows, of course, that you get better decisions when you have diverse decision making. So that's absolutely vital, and I completely endorse everything you've just said. Naimira, from your perspective, is there anything you would like to see, or in particular that you think must be an essential ingredient to building back better?
Yeah, there's loads of things and things that have been touched on in the conversation. I think regionally, we're obviously on a countdown to the Commonwealth Games come in, and that's an exciting time. So I think as a community, we have great things to look forward to. And I think for me, it's about the road to that being stocked with opportunity for entrepreneurship, business growth, mental and physical health, that increasing in women, and just seeing the settings set up so that we can get to a place of celebration and actually look at the city and be like, that really reflects what we look like. I know you guys are hot on stats and numbers, so I don't want to get this wrong, but I believe that it's 43% of Birmingham's ethnic minority community make up the 43%. So I think that reflecting and really focusing support on areas of need for those people, looking at that intersectionally and not making it not tokenistic, but I think to get true diversity, you need to actually go on a deeper level to look at each industry. So if I was taking that about music as my industry, you know, true diversity and looking at how it's affected would be looking at how it's affected promoters, to how it's affected singers, to DJs, because each of us have different lifestyles, we've got different paces and momentums to our daily work. So the true diversity would be exploring how that affects everybody. So yeah, again, bringing that back to a regional thing, I think across industries, looking at that and making sure that they're communicating between each other. That's what I would love to see. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's, again, really important, isn't it? Because the potential actually for the combined authorities when you come together as well to have a sort of impact with central government must be quite significant. Deborah, I just wanted to get your thoughts now on, you know, the West Midlands strategy for building back better, and where you are with that, and how you're thinking about that, and how you're thinking about women within that, you know, issues like childcare, social care and so on. What, are you know, well down on the road to you having your own plan?
Yeah. So there are a number of things. I mean, to just reflect on how we make this have real impact. So the data that has come out through the work that you've done, through the State of the Nation that West Midlands Women's Voice has undertaken, you know, we need to be absolutely relentless in making people see and hear what this data is telling us. And we need to demand that people use that data to inform not just the recovery or the plans they have for recovery, but the plans that they have for resetting whatever services they're going to deliver. So one of the things that COVID has done is make us, you know, rethink the way in which we live, the way in which we work, the way in which we travel, the way in which we play, you know, so all of this data right now needs to start informing people's thinking about that and the recovery that they're going to put in place. I agree with, I can't remember who, I think it was you, Pam, I think, that said women have to be part of the decision making. And that's one of the reasons why we pulled together the citizens panel, and we will continue to work with West Midlands Women's Voice to ensure that the voice of women is heard loudly. I think we should be lobbying and you know, pushing government to start thinking about this in a different way. And whilst we can do it at a regional level, I think there's a kind of national call to action as well. You know, and Pam, I really hope that we can keep in contact beyond this, because I think the relationship between Birmingham and Manchester, given that we have similar challenges but also similar opportunities, I think there will be strength in numbers in working with the full society in lobbying governments for some of these things. I think for me, specific issues around skills, although I think we've got a good track record of supporting women both into employment and skilling them up. I think we need to be more thoughtful, not about necessarily about the what, but the how as well. And I think one of the comments on the sidebar, the chat room, was talking about women undertaking training and skills provision part-time, virtually, doing more online courses to accommodate the kind of childcare and caring needs that they've got. And I just want to check that we're being thoughtful about that. And just generally, you know, not take no for an answer, you know, and you know, one of the things that I'm really keen to see is that you know, we've got a real opportunity to completely reimagine or revitalize, whatever kind of adjective you want to, or verb you want to use, but there's a real opportunity for us to do something different about our high streets and town centres now, because, you know, they will need to be different. And I want us to take the opportunity to not think about, you know, bringing more retail in. I want us to take the opportunity to bring more living space into our high streets, to more community and cultural kind of response, and facilities, and probably more important, local health provision. You know, what really upsets me is the fact that so many of our women from minority ethnic communities don't take advantage of health screening facilities for cultural reasons or environmental reasons. I'm not sure, but there are too many of our babies that die before they're 1 because they haven't taken advantage of antenatal and postnatal kind of services for a variety of reasons. And I think if we can put those screening services and childcare services in our local high streets, right in the middle of our communities, I think we'll get much better usage, and we'll be able to access those women who have been isolated for too long in a much better way. So that's the kind of thing that I want to do.
Yeah, designing around the reality of women's lives is absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I think we fully support that. Pam, I just wanted to come to you now. And there's a comment here from Charlotte who says, as a disabled woman, I worry that even more cuts to vital services will occur in the aftermath of the virus. And we know from data actually we published a couple of weeks ago that disabled women were saying they felt more isolated, that they'd lost services and support, and they'd lost informal support that they had because people weren't coming in to visit, and just the sort of day-to-day support that they were relying on. So we're really struggling. So just thinking about, again, those specific groups of particular need in the Greater Manchester area, what are you thinking about how you build back better in Greater Manchester?
I think what we're trying to do is build back equally, because I think that's the word that's missing. Because we yes, we want it to be better, but we want it to be more equal. And we've just done, our voluntary sector have just done a disabled person's survey, which you know, didn't show Greater Manchester in everything in a good light in terms of how disabled people were accessing services, particularly those people who've got autism, those people who've got physical disabilities, who relied on services to help them live their best life. And what we're doing with that survey, for example, is every district is considering that survey, so that as Deborah says, it's live data now, using it now. Every district is looking at their services in a COVID world and saying, well, how can we improve these for people with disabilities and women with disabilities? And I think that's really important that we take that data and we do make those changes now. and we do it across the board. Some will be tailored depending on different districts, but some can be done at a strategic level, and the leaders are already considering that data on what we can do, and I think that's really important. I think the other thing is, and Deborah's talked about Greater Manchester and the West Midlands working together, and absolutely, of course, we will do that. But what about the Northern Powerhouse? And is it a Northern Powerhouse just for certain people? Or is it going to be a Northern Powerhouse which is going to embrace equalities, and those mayors are going to make sure that they are championing those equalities, and that we are, as has been said, making it real. It's not strategic intent, it's actually delivering those differences as we do come out of recovery and we do live with COVID for a period of time, that we are making sure that we're not building in more inequalities than we had before, because we're also dealing with some new inequalities. Some disabled people and disabled women didn't feel disenfranchised, but COVID has had that impact on them. So how are we going to re-energise that and bring back that confidence? But we're actually considering that data now and making some changes now in Greater Manchester around that area.
Well, that's really good to hear. So we're coming to the end of the event now. I've only got 1 or 2 minutes left, so I'm going to come back to the panel for a very quick final word on what they think fundamentally the national Westminster government needs to do to respond better to the regions. There's a link there too in the chat function to join Enforce-It. You can go to our website, become a member if you want to support our work, or make a donation to support these COVID events. And also just sign up to the newsletter. That's free if you can't afford to make a donation or to join. Please do follow us on social media. The hashtag for tonight has been the Corona Conversations. And there's a nice message here from Kiranjit, who's very grateful to all the panel for supporting our drive to collaborate across regions, share learnings, have a joint voice when lobbying government. And I think that's really, really important, because we're going to have to do a heavy lot of government lobbying in the next few months ahead, just to really get some progress here. So, Asma, I'm going to come to you first. Is there one final message for national government in terms of how we respond better to the regions?
I think it's important to not be so London-centric and listen to voices throughout the regions, just to ensure people don't fall through the cracks. And I think it's about actually properly listening to the issues raised and taking action on them, and whether that means giving the power locally for action to be taken for a targeted approach. But I think the most important thing is to, look outside, not think that it's a one-size-fits-all mentality, but look at different issues facing different areas and different people.
Thank you. And Namaira, what would you like to see?
Good. Yeah, so I think as a direct response to listen, but also I think not only to listen, just the creative dissemination of the research. It needs to be understood by people who it's about, and also it needs to be easy to explain. And I think theatre and music and the arts is the best place to get people to reimagine and to take a step out of themselves for a second. So more of that conversation, definitely.
Absolutely, we really need our creative industries without question. Pam, what's your message for number 10?
I think the message is back women, because they're part of the big part of your recovery programme. They're an economic engine. Make specific funding available that's targeting women, training, childcare, and also make sure that all women are digitally enabled, because the Victorians made sure we all had clean water. Digital is the new currency, and to have specific funding targeted at upskilling women in digital.
Brilliant, thank you. And Deborah, I'm going to give you the last word. So what would you like to say?
Just everything that everybody else has said. I would also add, Pam, the green tech revolution as well is alongside digital is going to be the area that we need, and actually we don't want to do it, we need to do it. Climate change is still a massive issue for us, and actually was raised by a lot of women, a lot of mothers in particular, who are very concerned about the future for their children. So, you know, I started this by saying the biggest overriding emotion for me in all of this was frustration. And I kind of end with it because I still think that government needs to devolve more power and influence and resources and decision making out to localities. And I just, you know, go back to the issue I raised around, you know, localised healthcare. Somebody who works in Whitehall doesn't know what the needs of somebody who lives on Borsley Green Road is, and they are the women and the communities where we need to focus our energies most. So my challenge to government is have trust and faith in those that know best.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much. That's a very appropriate message to end on. And again, we completely endorse that. If you look at this function, you'll see lots of interesting and useful links, including to our partners for today, West Midlands Women's Voice. So I want to give them a shout out. They've been fantastic to work with. Yeah. So a huge thank you to our panellists, to Chris Hopkins and Savannah Conway, who did some fantastic research for us, to Asma Day, Namaira, Pam Smith and Deborah Cadman. Please do join us again for another Coronavirus Conversations event that we're going to be having in the next few weeks. We're going to keep these events going, and I think we need to return to the regions. Another conversation perhaps in a few months' time to see how we're getting on with some of those messages for number 10 and others, but we're not going to forget about our regions and make sure that we do build back better at every level. Thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.